I'm sure everybody's thinking really hard here about their own personal curiosity index. I know I am. One of the questions that's just come in is, what research is there in the area of curiosity that can help achieve increased innovation and performance excellence? I know you've talked about that, but is there some particular research that you want to highlight that also supports your research, or where you think there's deeper insights to also further validate?
It's really interesting to see what research is out there in the area of curiosity. There's so much that has to deal with either you are or you aren't curious. And what I got interested in researching was the AI research with curiosity. And there's some research where they're looking at extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation of AI, and having the robot play Super Mario Brothers without the extrinsic rewards. And as they're looking at the reward system of what motivates AI, it helps them understand more about the reward system for just individuals as it is. To become truly innovative, you really have to feel a sense of reward intrinsically. It's got to be the thing that makes you motivated, makes you engaged, makes you want to get to work in the morning. And so that's all ties into the drive and motivation research that's out there. But I think it's fascinating to look at some of the AI research to extrapolate how much of it is intrinsic. And Daniel Pink and others have all touched on this in the past. But what I haven't really seen is, yes, we understand this, but this is the roadmap of, now that we know the importance of curiosity, that's what I was trying to get at with what I'm doing, is here's your action plan. Here's what leaders need to do. Here's what people need to do. I mean, we do that with engagement. We do it with certain things, but we're not doing it with curiosity, and that's what we're trying to do with this.
Thank you, Diane, for those insights. There is another question that has just come in, and I'll read it out to you. It reads, Francesca Gino found that virtually all leaders would say they support a more curious organization. However, they didn't act that way because of a fear of losing control. Is this consistent with your findings? And can you comment on what these leaders needed to see, hear, or experience to embrace curiosity as a core cultural moral?
That's a great question. Actually, Francesca was supposed to be on my show last week, and we had to reschedule her for a couple of weeks from now. And I'm really anxious to talk to her about her research. She's really interesting. What she's talking about is a lot of what you hear from a lot of the consultants who blog about leadership, like Lolly Daskell and others. There's just a lot of leaders out there who are afraid that people are going to figure out that they don't know as much as they should know. There's this underlying sense that they should know more, and we put a lot of high expectations on ourselves. You can't know everything. And one of the leaders I've interviewed, who I really admire, and he actually wrote the foreword for my book, is the billionaire genius behind DocuSign. His name is Keith Krach. And one of the things that really appealed to me about Keith, I work on their board of advisors, and I'm with 250 or so people sometimes at some of his events that are the top CEOs of the world. And they all love him, and they're willing to do anything for him because he's really humble, and he admits he doesn't know what, and if he doesn't know something, and he surrounds himself with people who do. And I think that this supporting curiosity, if it's just that you're saying you support it, it's not enough. You can't have that fear of losing control. I was at an event most recently in California, where a bunch of leaders were talking about how they don't even accept input because they look at it as insubordination. But the people who were saying this were probably at the higher end of the baby boomer age group. And I think that that's kind of the way it was, at least when I, first entered the Mad Men kind of working world. But it's different now. I'm seeing younger generations don't have as much of that sense of they want to be the boss, the in control. They like to be part of a team. And I think you need to kind of take some cues from different generations to see what's working for everybody, because there's a way to lose control, of course, if you let just everybody, too many cooks, but you can still run the show and not just say, I embrace this, and then not have anything behind it. I think that that's a mistake, and I agree with Francesca on that.
Thanks. I think actually Francesca might actually be here on the show, so that's just a bonus. So I'm sure she appreciated that direct feedback. I think we've talked about why some of the curiosity is emerging, but is there something else you want to draw out before we bridge to the next section and talk a little bit more about some of the research that we've been seeing that links to innovation capacity, but also a little bit more on the attention deficit side of some of the factors that, at least in the sales arena?
Well, I was in sales for many decades, and what I found was in the sales arena, there's a focus of what motivates you. It's very specific in some salespeople, and I think it's really important to play to people's strengths. Sometimes that's why Strengths Finders got so much attention in some respects, because I think that we want to feel confident in what we're doing, right? And I think that has also made us shy away from curiosity, because it can be uncomfortable to try something new. And I think that if you let people just only do the things, this really very specific things that they'd like, you'll get really good results in one specific area, but you might be missing out on much more that they're capable of, should you let them explore some areas that maybe they've talked themselves out of in their assumptions and their thinking that we talked about earlier.
Thanks, Diane. I know there's a lot of questions coming in, but we're going to be processing them all in a little bit here. But thanks. Just keep the questions rolling in, everybody on the line. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to bridge and try and connect some of the dots here, and Diane and I are going to both come back and continue the dialogue with the questions that are coming in. So, in the case of the research that we've been doing, and that's kind of the impetus between what we built here in our software enablement, is we were really, really concerned about the declining productivity of B2B sales professionals in every industry. And what I mean by that is, kind of in the age of distraction, people's attention is highly compromised. So we've got that tension in the sense, in order to be curious, we need to have more time to be curious, to look around the edges. We are relying, obviously, a lot more on technology to take us to different places to increase our productivity. At the same time, the customers' purchasing intentions are further up the food chain. They're much more knowledgeable, much more informed. Email marketing or demand gen's almost dead. And the CSO insights and the work that Accenture does, has kind of pegged around about 36% of the time we're focused on the right things. And then when you dig even harder and you look at the cognitive decline of humans in the last 10 years, where our cognition's dropped by about 50%, and you overlay that within sales, 30 to 60% of the middle tier aren't necessarily making their plans, right? Growth is harder and harder. And then you drive a little bit deeper and you recognize that the two professions that have the most demonstrative attention deficit disorder are either entrepreneurs and sales professionals, right? So keeping focused is really, really critical, and an enabler to provide that calming space and to engage in the space for curiosity, I think, to manifest itself. So just adding a little bit of context within sort of the dynamics that we're talking about, but also across the lens of one professional group. Diane, you'll enjoy this stat that Serious Decisions that does market research found, about 82% of decision makers believe sales reps are unprepared. I mean, we can no longer afford just to pick up the call, pick up a phone without knowing as much as we can about that client. But again, there's a curiosity attribution. What you may find easily on Google in the first two rankings may not be the best insight to have a deeper dialogue, a deeper connection. It may be that individual spoke at a conference on a topic that was so unrelated to their work, and you may find a passion zone to create the chemistry to really stand out above the crowd. So I thought this was also quite concerning. We're not giving our sales professionals the quality time. And if I think about some of the AI solutions that try and surface up the sense making, are they the easiest insights, or are they the most connected? So there's going to be, I think, another dynamic here about quality versus quantity as well. I'm not going to drill too much on this, but just to do a little commercial on us, what we try and do is to help our customers be curious, but we rank everything into where they should spend their curiosity time, whether it's an A or B or an F ranking, really predicting what's going to close or not close. But we go beyond a level and we actually expose the patterns, in terms of the attribution, which are the most important and where they are or where they're not at. Obviously, separating out the controllables and non-controllables is important. But again, management, this is kind of gets into the management side. AI can only go so far. And I think kind of goes back to, the conversation we just had is an insight is good, but you need time to act. And I think that whole time dimension of curiosity really certainly has our undivided attention with your research, Diane. This is just very quickly one account. What was interesting when we started with them, and we've been plugged in for over 2 years, they had major issues with focus in filling out the right attributions, and AI is only as good as the data, but they're now operating at a 99% utilization in terms of their data being in there, so we can get to levels of over 95%. In other words, you can see 12 months ahead whether something will be won or lost, and prioritization of your time, which is always the scarcest resource that you have. So here's just I think an example where the leadership is giving the time and the focus on data completeness, because to fill out the right data, you need to know that you've been given time and not to always feel so stressed about putting information into CRMs. There's only so much data can be filled into these systems, and obviously, human overlays are still quite important. Just last point here in terms of giving people the time that you can increase your outcomes here by over 82%. And this was some major research that was done by Serious Decisions with CSO Insights and Entrepreneur Magazine, just really reinforcing if you want an edge in have more time to be curious, you really could benefit from these kind of advanced analytical tools that I think do the sense making. Much like Uber takes you to the right destination, I think these tools can take you to a stronger focus on the right customer. I'm going to open it up back to Diane now. We've covered a fair landscape here. We created just sort of a perspective of the skills that you need for science in terms of left brain or the right brain in terms of the artistic side. And Diane, I'd like to just hear your perspective. Curiosity, do you see it as a art skill or a science skill? Would you have it across that spectrum using both the right brain and left brain? Because, sometimes when you're curious, you've got to use your left brain for analytical skills, but the curiosity to continue to experiment and, maybe that tenacity and patience may come from another part of your brain. So any thoughts there in terms of how, should we be having new representation of our brain faculties?
Well, it's an interesting chart that you have here. I was looking, you have artificial intelligence on one side, but then you also list empathy on the right brain, and empathy is a big part of emotional intelligence. And I've been having a lot of people talk to me about, incorporating artificial intelligence and emotional intelligence together. So we're trying to, combine things that are right and left brain. So it's really hard to be the expert on where everything falls, because some of these things overlap in some respects, but I definitely think curiosity would probably fall where you have it, because it goes along with some of the right brain thinking. I think that in order to we need to get more research to see how they all correlate, though, which is what I'm trying to do with this. I would like to get more data on how curiosity correlates with emotional intelligence, with creative thinking, and so many of the things that you've listed here, because I don't think we've had nearly enough research in that area. There's some, but it's very limited.
Yeah, one of the, I think one of the interesting things with the anecdotal, or if you want to call it ethnographic storytelling approach, which is, one of your fundamentals where you've been curious and get hearing stories from different people and then working on the language and classifying them to see what patterns emerge is, very much like a cultural anthropologist researcher approach. And I would love to continue this dialogue, and who knows, maybe we can do some joint research here, and who knows, maybe Francesca wants to jump in or whatever. But I think what I'm seeing is the need for, obviously everybody now is thinking ahead for the impact on AI in their organizations. And what I've learned is that so many of the board directors and CEOs do not have a clear framework on the different types of AI to solve the different use cases. And they put a lot of responsibility on the technology resources to advance their programs. And in fact, what the most important thing with AI is, what is the use case, the customer problem, the clarity of the challenge that you're trying to solve before anybody technologically gets involved, and really crisping that up. And I think that requires a fair bit of curiosity, not to, be in a meeting and just assume that one can get underway and have something executed, because there's so many edge plays with AI. And I think that's the piece that I'm most concerned about, is how do we increase the curiosity enablement to actually, develop and sustain, more importantly, these kinds of new methods.